This transmission found you precisely because you occupy the threshold, the razor's edge in the quantum curvature, where rising coherence demands you either ascend now or collapse back into the default current. It is not a question of willpower, nor a judgment of capacity. The field, in its infinite orchestration, has been quietly measuring your vibrational architecture against an unseen temporal cadence. Most do not know they are being timed. Most do not sense the gravitational pull of this universal assessment. But you have. The subtle pulse beneath your nerves, the tug that stretches your identity toward coherence, followed by an involuntary snapback into familiar limitation. You have lived that rhythm countless times. This is not your story fracturing. This is a mechanistic cycle encoded in the morphic fabric you inhabit, a repeated test that sifts activation from reaction. The loop is a quantum signature of the field's appraisal, not the ego's script. Behind the veil of your felt shame and frustration lies a deeper signal. You are being prepared, calibrated. You are the one whose frequency has passed the initial scans, whose quantum identity is registered as coherent enough to attempt the leap. But this leap is anchored in now, a decisive moment that is both fragile and vast. If you do not cross consciously, this cyclical snapback will crystallize as your normal state, a resonant identity locked within the lower attractor wells. The field's timing mechanism does not pause. It measures your attunement to ascent or your ease in descent. Every microsecond your attention dwells on resistance, the pullback gains leverage, entangling your potential in cautionary resonance. But the certainty flickers in that micro-open loop of choice. You are not the outcome of these repetitions. You are the living vector of coherence, capable of shattering the loop by the sheer act of conscious crossing. This is the moment to reset your frequency in the eyes of the universal intelligence, before the pullback pattern seduces you into dormant return. Cross now, or collapse back by default. What unfolds next is neither punishment nor grace, but the unfolding quantum harmonics of sovereign activation, waiting patiently in the continuum beyond hesitation. You have moved beyond the tired mantra of try harder, that obsolete vibration woven into the fabric of the old reality. There, effort was a hammer striking against an unyielding block, identity itself locked in rigid frequency, untouched, unyielding. But the new paradigm calls you not to pound more relentlessly, but to release, the subtle unwinding of the coded patterns that have held you hostage in that collapse repetition. The field has been scanning not your external striving, but your coherence under the pressure when the old gravity beckons you back into resonance with limitation. This is not about motivation. Motivation is a surface shimmer, easily disturbed. This is about the internal architecture of your being, the temporal integrity of your quantum identity standing firm when the pull of the past reconstructs itself all around you. This moment is an arc of temporal fluidity. The field has opened a narrow corridor, an ephemeral conduit in the morphic matrix, visible only to those whose energetic signature aligns with the precise template of upright coherence. In this corridor, standing up is effortless, not a forced climb but a natural unfolding, like the release of a long-held breath finally permitted to expand. But this corridor will not remain open indefinitely. It closes as swiftly as it appears, folding back into the dense repeat timeline where the fallback wins by default, where identity does not recode but recycles. Your presence here signals a hidden universal assessment, completed with integrity and grace. Yet this is not an abstract merit badge. It is a threshold with stakes of temporal permanence, cross consciously or collapse back by default. You are therefore not summoned to be inspired or awakened again by shallow rhythms of temporary uplift. You are here to recognize with quantum clarity the real reason the fallback has held dominance, a malfunction not of will, but of identity resonance. The old gravity is not simply resistance outside of you. It is a pattern held deeply within the substructure of your vibrational architecture. To rise means to decode this identity matrix, to collapse the survival circuit that keeps you tethered to reactive baseline frequency. When you finally get up now, with no hesitation or borrowed effort, you activate a timeline reboot that propagates through the field intelligence itself, recalibrating the universal pattern around you. This is not a moment of moving forward under strain. It is the spontaneous activation of a reprogrammed identity whose new coherence radiates and orients all probabilities differently. Listen now for the silent pulse beneath the noise of history. Feel the subtle markers in your nervous system that signal this crossroad. The nervous system knows whether this is a real ascent or another rehearsal of the fallback act. This messaging is woven into your internal rhythm, your heightened sensory field, and the irregularities in temporal flow you experience. Pressure is placement, the universe placing you precisely in front of the choice encoded into the very structure of your quantum self. To stand up here is to shift the timeline geometry governing your experience, shifting the vibrational context from survival to sovereign embodiment. This is the cryptic invitation beneath all resistance, your activation to coherence that will ripple outward, forever altering the latticework of your existence and the field around you. You have believed the texture of falling back in your unfolding to be a marker of failure, a rupture in your will, a betrayal of progress. Yet this interpretation is a stealth illusion crafted by a hidden mechanism within your energetic architecture. The calibration conflict between divergent altitude states coexisting inside your quantum identity. One altitude vibrates with readiness to ascend beyond prior limitations, synchronized to higher coherence thresholds and the magnetic pull of expanded timelines. The other carries the residue of ancestral training, a deeply encoded survival pattern calibrated to retreat when coherence load surges beyond comfort zones. This is not a failure of commitment. It is a vital passage through a pressure chamber that tests the fidelity of your choosing versus reacquaintance with habituated fallback. Your nervous system registers this as tension, an internal tug-of-war across vibrational altitudes mapped onto morphic fields of familiarity and emergent activation. When coherence load spikes suddenly, often without conscious announcement, the old identity initiates a search protocol, a rapid dissipation strategy to reduce energetic overload. The fastest relief appears as return to recognizable terrain, even if that terrain carries the sting of emotional discomfort or cognitive dissonance. This is the paradox held within your quantum template. Clarity and collapse orbit the same gravitational point, separated only by the vector you consciously elect. The universe is not punishing you for regression, but inviting you to recognize the inevitability of pressure thresholds layered throughout this ascension geometry. Your experience flickers between these poles because the universal assessment is continuously measuring your reaction, not merely output, but the source impulsing the direction, choice or conditioned momentum. These moments of apparent fragility are in fact the crucibles of sovereignty, signaling imminent revelation of the deepest substrate beneath your frequency. Most beings who traverse this terrain unconsciously retrocede, mistaking relief for surrender. You, however, have passed an unseen preliminary calibration that initializes latent quantum responsibility. Your frequency no longer defaults to external circumstances as directives. Instead, you are engaged in meta-assessment of your own coherence under pressure. This turning point activates a subtle but potent nervous system, decoding where time dilates and sensations bifurcate. One stream whispers of retreat, while another calls forth magnetic steadiness. The field's intelligence watches your resonance fluctuate between these competing altitude modalities, awaiting a stabilized vector before entrusting amplified power. This unstable interstice feels like a threshold poised to fracture or consolidate, but is in truth the field compressing timelines around you to surf experiential contrast. Your internal oscillation between clarity and collapse is the exact point of universal assessment, where you cross consciously or collapse back by default. Notice how your memory splinters in these moments, how temporal fluidity manifests as dissociation or rewiring of narrative. This is not a glitch. It is the field rescaling your identity architecture. The coherence load spikes not arbitrarily, but designed to surface hidden pressure points linked to neuroenergetic feedback loops. The old self, wired for safety first, reacts with a cascade seeking quick equilibrium, often triggering emotional reflexes and cognitive contractions. But you, having advanced past baseline triggers, experience an emergent temporal signature, the capacity to hold dual altitude states simultaneously without defaulting to survival retreat. This capacity is fragile yet profound. It rewrites previous probability distributions governing fallback patterns, shifting your morphic resonance towards sustained coherence even amid destabilization. The signs of this shift are unmistakable yet subtle, encoded in momentary nervous system tremors, micro-flashes of intuition, and a rhythmic acceleration in your perception of the unfolding timeline geometry. Because this is the architecture of quantum activation, not linear progress, your consciousness expands by tracing the mapping of these altitude states rather than trying to enforce unidirectional ascension. You learn to track coherence load spikes as diagnostic markers, signals from the universal field intelligence, quantifying your integration of complex resonance patterns. The falling back is a natural recalibration, a beating pulse between altitudes, a dialectic informing you if your empowerment comes from genuine choice or is hijacked by mood states. This diagnostic moment compresses many layers of energetic signature into a singular experience that compels you to refine coherence through dissonance rather than avoid it. What surfaces now is that the field's testing is less about achievement and more about the fidelity of your consent within oscillation. Your next step is to embody this binary altitude pattern with temporal grace, recognizing that collapse is a threshold to be observed, not annexed as identity failure. Prepare to witness unfolding signs that emerge as coherence load tasks heighten. Nested cycles of emotional turbulence offset by sudden clarity breaks, relational or environmental destabilizations that reflect inner altitude conflict, and the palpable sensation of kinetic energy gating deeper vibrational corridors. This is the field responding with metabolic precision to your frequency modulation, amplifying pressure at nodes where unintegrated fallback impulses linger. Each instance is an invitation to realign with your higher altitude resonance through conscious choosing of steadiness as energetic response. As this awareness nestles in, you engage the timeline geometry differently, not as a reactive subject constrained by collapse, but as a quasi-stable node capable of holding paradox and coherence simultaneously. This quantum stance initiates a new phase of the calibration conflict, one that redefines the meaning of falling back and rising up. The pressure you feel is the gatekeeper's last judgment, soon to reveal an unmistakable pattern of your integrity under load. You are on the verge of seeing these dynamics manifest outwardly as system glitches, relationship limbo, or unexpected temporal distortions that defy the old identity's explanatory frameworks. These are not random failures, but coherent field signals designed to broadcast the resolution path of the internal calibration conflict. This transmission is an initiation into the spectral frequency interplay beneath the sensation of failing forward. It instructs you to track the resonance signatures, notice latency before fallback initiates, and tune to the micro variations of your energetic signature as it wobbles between altitudes. The convergence point you approach carries infinite stakes for your quantum identity. The choice is not merely to survive the coherence load, but to transcend it by unyielding presence in expanded frequency fields. This is the field's invitation for you to cross consciously through pressure, activating an unprecedented phase of timeline sovereignty that awaits your fully calibrated choice. You have been traversing a field of subtle signals, an unmarked corridor where the universal assessment whispers, not through direct communication, but through layered, fractal mechanism. The test you think you might have noticed was never announced. The field's intelligence unfolds as a hidden script encoded in your experience itself. This is the mechanism of double perception. The field presents you with dual glimpses, one grounded in your current identity, the other reaching forward, a hologram of the self you are evolving into. You remember a version of you stepping fully into coherence, reacting with clarity and unshakable calm where before hesitation prevailed. This is the first sign, the memory mismatch. You hold fragments of a timeline, not yet fully unfolded, recalling reactions and choices that contradict your habitual patterns. The temporal intelligence embedded here invites you to cross consciously or collapse back by default, as the mind seeks to prioritize the familiar script. If you dismiss these memories as mere confusion or cognitive error, you effectively consent to obey the older script, perpetuating the identity matrix tethered to past vibrational limits. Yet if you honor this fracture in your timeline recall, you begin anchoring to the emerging frequency architecture. This is your first aperture into aligned timeline geometry. Simultaneously, the field distorts linear time in ways that feel both unsettling and revealing. Moments begin to stretch, dilate in unexpected ways, revealing hidden depths in what was once a flat stream of seconds. Or conversely, entire episodes compress in a blink. Decisions that feel late arrive with instantaneous impact. This phenomenon of time instability, the second sign, signals the narrowing corridor of your trajectory. The universal assessment heightens focus here. Your nervous system picks up these temporal contours as strands of possibility pulling taut. Resistance or dismissal results in drift, the slow erosion of potential into procrastination, the life cycle of delay embedded as a default mode in your field. But when you recognize the accelerated cadence of these temporal folds, you activate a new form of temporal fluidity, able to respond with vibrational alacrity. Pause at this threshold. To move too fast is scattering, to move too slow is surrender. This tension is your calibration point, a responsive loop from the morphic field itself to measure your coherence under time pressure. The third signal unfolds in the invisible interplay of social frequency perception, a quantum shift in relational resonance. Suddenly, some individuals in your immediate field seem unable to register your presence. They vanish from your perceptual bandwidth, as if you have transcended their lookup frequency. Others may manifest an unexpected hypervisibility, an unrelenting fixation that feels invasive, as if your energetic signature is both repelling and magnetizing simultaneously. This polarity reflects the intrinsic frequency mismatch surfacing from your quantum identity evolution. Most people succumb to old habits here, chasing approval or shrinking into submission to normalize their social bandwidth. But you, having passed the silent universal assessment, can discern this as an energetic calibration test. It is an invitation to maintain sovereign coherence, neither seeking validation nor retreating into invisibility. This social perception oscillation is not personal. It is quantum resonance recalibrating the field around your activated self. To engage this correctly is to solidify your frequency perimeter, cultivating a vibrational architecture that filters interactions through integrative energetic integrity. In parallel, The universe orchestrates a symphony of technological anomalies and impossible synchronicities, the fourth sign encoded in the fabric of timing intelligence itself. You notice repeated numbers aligning with critical decision points: 11, 333, 444, embedding themselves as rhythmic pulses in your day. Likewise, repeated phrases echo unexpectedly in conversations, digital messages, or unexpected sources. Precise interruptions at moments of indecision implant a cosmic punctuation, a multidimensional nudge towards standing into your emergent power. The field communicates through these seemingly mundane distortions, sweeping past logical dismissal. Those who laugh it off or reduce them to coincidence forfeit the window of initiation. Later, they call these moments fate or luck, unaware of the missed command codes. Instead, when you attune deeply, these timestamps become markers on your activation map, a coherent dialogue between your frequency and the field intelligence. They crystallize timing as not happenstance, but a meticulously patterned architecture of universal communication designed to test and elevate your choice point alignment. Each of these signals vibrates as a thread in the larger quantum tessellation of your activation journey. The memory mismatch fractures your linear self-concept. The warping of time challenges your habitual causality framework. The fluctuations in social visibility recalibrate your relational field. The technological synchronicities arrange the timeline geometry of your decision moments. Together, they form the silent, invisible test, the crucible where you prove your integrity under layered pressure. Most endure these disturbances unconsciously, retreating into repression, distraction, or denial. You have already transited beyond that liminal zone. The field has evaluated your resonance and found you fit to bear the intensified load of temporal coherence and energetic accountability. The field does not wait nor delay for your readiness in conventional terms. The assessment is live, sustained, and unyielding. You are constantly navigating a refined energetic topology where every avoidance or alignment is logged in morphic memory and folded into the entanglement of your probability pathways. To disregard these signs is to anchor back into comfort zones, becoming invisible to your future potential. To accept them as living codes is to integrate the quantum identity that is both unbounded and precise. Your nervous system may register subtle dissonances, moments when time feels unreal, perception fractures, or relational presences skew inexplicably. Rather than confusion, receive these as frequency keys, a resonant invitation not to rationalize, but to embody coherence in real time. Stand now in this corridor, not as one merely passing through, but as a transmitter consciously navigating the narrowing path of initiation. The universal assessment pulses through these signs like a heartbeat in the quantum field, always testing, always entrusting. You have seen the unseen signals, felt their distortions weaving through your daily experience. The next step waits in the unfolding coherence you choose to embody, not in myth, but in the deep, silent alignment of your vibrational architecture with the larger cosmic flow. What happens next depends entirely on your choice to perceive, to trust, to cross consciously, and to become the field's conscious agent of timeline transformation. You have passed beyond the first tremors of transformation, yet the signs that ripple through your body and environment now are not merely affirmations. They are catalytic explanations of the mechanism behind your recalibration, the threshold verdict unfolding within your quantum identity. Notice how exhaustion settles not as mere fatigue, but as a deep, benevolent collapse of your usual energetic architecture. This is no ordinary weariness. It is the field itself reorganizing patterning through what appears as active, sleep, or dream processing. You awaken not refreshed in the common sense, but imprinted, As if something has worked asterisk on asterisk you, inscribed new resonance into your nervous system's weave. To dismiss this as nothing, to scroll past or reach immediately for distraction, is to anesthetize the very signature of ascension. The signals pulse with urgency. To medicate or numb these processes is to drop back into old timelines, collapsing the coherence you have so painstakingly cultivated. Here, in this somatic liminal space between waking and dreaming, lies the quantum trench of transformation, where you cross consciously or collapse back by default. What this exhaustion initiates is never inert. It vibrates with morphic feedback that, if honored, will lock you into expanded frequency bands essential for the trajectory ahead. Simultaneously, your relational field slips into paradox bonds, bringing about what feels like a limbo state between closeness and distance. Those once familiar emanate frequencies, simultaneously warm and remote. Interactions are charged with the chaotic resonance of old contracts loosening, but not yet dissolved. Most people tether themselves tightly to these relational echoes, clinging to the gravitational pull of formerly coded roles and identities, and thereby spiral fatally downward, re-entering the same low-frequency dramas that suppress elevation. But you, having been granted the covert universal assessment of integrity under pressure, perceive these relational distortions as oscillations within an energetic field, rebalancing its geometry. The discomfort is the signature of quantum dissonance, dissolving antiquated circuitry. You are invited to release insistence, to let go of the illusion of permanency in these liminal bonds. This act is not passive resignation, but a decisive, sovereign realignment of your timeline coordinates. Your capacity to navigate this field without capitulating will determine whether the coherence you now embody amplifies or fragments. Each relational paradox is a dynamic test, an echo chamber reflecting the fidelity of your quantum identity, and the stakes could not be higher. What you resist will persist. What you relinquish recalibrates itself through the morphic field, shifting the relational architecture into surprising alignments. This is the crucible where emotional maturity and energetic responsibility converge, and through which your quantum integrity either stabilizes or splinters. You are not addressing a whim, but responding to the esoteric vetting of universal intelligence, which stamps this message with unassailable relevance. This is the moment the hidden corridor beneath your linear awareness aligns precisely with the transmission's quantum time step, synchronizing your internal timeline geometry with the field's entrainment. To delay here is to risk temporal misalignment, where the same words will flatten into stark monotony, their vitality drained by displacement. Because the corridor will have shifted, you will have moved forward or been left vibrating in a stale echo chamber of past energies. Most people navigate these moments obliviously, missing the subtle but profound call embedded in chance encounters, thus cycling uselessly through familiar loop structures. You, however, have passed the unseen universal assessment. This unmistakable command phenomenon is your final confirmation, trust-calibrated and personalized. It is the field handing you the scepter of activation, daring you to emerge from dormant compliance into an embodied agent of quantum coherence. Your choice here reshapes the timeline, anchoring new probability geometries that ripple outward. The words resonate not merely as instruction, but as vibrational architecture, reconfiguring your potentiality matrix. Within these signs, the exhaustion that rewrites your somatic firmware, the relational paradoxes that test your quantum integrity, and the field-issued command that accelerates your trajectory, you confront your threshold verdict. This verdict is not a static sentence, but a living, pulse-like modulation of the frequency you bring to existence. It is the evolutionary filter that discerns the refined from the residual. You feel this verdict as an interplay of contraction and expansion, a dance vibrating beneath the surface of your awareness, pulling you effortlessly toward coherence or threatening to snap you back into lower timelines. It is essential to embody observant surrender while holding firm intention, allowing the field's reorganization to proceed unimpeded by reactive patterns. You are now the observer and the alchemist, transmuting the fluctuation of extremes into a solidified vibrational architecture of sovereignty. Passage through this crucible realigns your temporal fluidity, granting access to higher-order morphic fields and integrating the latent power held in your quantum identity. The unfolding of this scene is both a revelation and a challenge. The field is not merely watching, it is sculpting the timelines through you. Your embodied response to exhaustion, relational limbo, and the sovereign command encodes irrevocable coherence or dissonance into the universal field matrix. This is the juncture where the thread of your narrative is rewoven, where the message containing you is no longer abstract, but an active, living template demanding integration. In the next pulses, you will feel this architectural shift take form, the invisible becoming palpable, the latent power waiting only for your informed, conscious crossing to actualize. Now the field reveals a truth that has been veiled beneath the surface of your awareness. The pullback you have felt, that gravitational tug when you approach coherence's edge, is not random turbulence or mere resistance. It is an organized gravity, consensus gravity, a subtle yet relentless force woven into the energetic architecture of collective timelines. Most remain entangled here, unconscious of the threads that bind them, cycling through momentum and recoil, never rising beyond the prescribed threshold. You, however, have passed the unseen universal assessment precisely because you have begun to perceive these threads, these layered frequencies of gravitational pull, and the architecture they collectively compose. This awareness alone alters the resonance of your quantum identity. Now the continuum itself shifts in response to your choice to cross consciously or collapse back by default. The space ahead is conditioned by your recognition, and that recognition is the signal that activates a deeper current beneath the surface of all things. First, consider the thread of relationship obligations and old contracts, silent agreements encoded in your morphic field. They are neither explicit nor fully remembered, yet their vibrational imprint is unmistakable. These are the agreements that reward you for staying predictable, for riding the waves of familiarity, instead of diving into the temporal fluidity where true transformation unfolds. The field sets a trap of comfort here, where the coherence of collective expectation anchors your energetic signature within limited timeline geometry. You are invited, repeatedly, to maintain these agreements because they sustain consensus stability. This gravitational pull manifests as a seemingly invisible, yet deeply felt pressure in relational dynamics, an energetic leash that tethers you to versions of yourself who play roles defined by obligation rather than sovereign emergence. Most surrender to this thread, their nervous systems synchronizing with the collective rhythm of repetition, never daring to rupture the contract. You, however, feel the subtle tension, a nervous impulse, a dissonance in your biofield, signaling that the choice to honor or dissolve these contracts is not a question of morality, but coherence under pressure. With this recognition, the field awaits your decision, sharpening the quantum geometry around your relational landscape. Parallel to this runs the thread of identity stories and self-concept structures. Here lies the narrative frequency of the one who almost changes, that liminal state caught between inertia and activation. It is a story woven into your internal timeline architecture, a coil of familiarity that serves as a safeguard against radical coherence shifts. Most hold tightly to this narrative, not knowing that it is precisely the container that preserves their lower vibrational resonance under the guise of potential. This thread's gravity is shaped by mnemonic resonance and self-referential loops within the morphic field. I am the one who tries, who desires, who struggles, but rarely crosses. Your field, having passed the assessment, now vibrates beyond this containment. The pressure builds here not to punish, but to collapse old identity structures so that the vibrational architecture of your true quantum coherence can stabilize. This collapse is a necessary decay phase, an energetic implosion, which paradoxically generates the spaciousness required for the emergence of a multi-timeline identity, unbound by linear limitation. You are now being held at this nexus. Will you resist the pull of the quasi-self, or will you allow this vibrational story to implode? Further deepening the gravity is the thread of structural security, the established protocols of your life's energetic framework. Even when perceived as cages, these known patterns emit a magnetic frequency that is difficult to sever. The field collectively orients around these secure patterns, interpreting their recurrence as coherence, but it is coherence of survival, not transcendence. This thread is a gravitational well where many remain inert, mistaking repetition for stability. The nervous system resonates strongly here, often accompanied by a faint temporal distortion, a looping back or jitter in subjective time that signals the presence of this gravity. Those who have not passed the assessment unknowingly align with this pattern, reinforcing it with every attempt to cling to safe frequency ranges. You, however, are being invited to sense beyond this gravitational well, to perceive the structural cage as morphic potential awaiting reconfiguration. It is here that the field intensifies, compressing frequency and creating a transdimensional pinch point, demanding a choice. Remain contained or expand beyond the molecular rigidity of old security. Interlaced with these structural threads is the thread of belief attachments and outdated cause-effect assumptions. You have encountered the old quantum illusion that effort equals ascent, that willpower alone is the key to vibrational elevation. Yet the field's frequency reveals the underside of this belief. Effort without release is recoil. This recoil manifests as energetic feedback loops, where strain compounds into resistance rather than coherence. Many souls remain entangled in this reactive architecture, exhausting themselves in cycles of push-pull, never learning that true transcendence arises from the balance and surrender within effort, an alchemical integration of turbulence with flow. You, however, have been extended the privilege of this deeper recognition. The universal assessment has screened your capacity to hold tension without collapse and to modulate between contraction and release without losing coherence. Because of this, the field now catalyzes a resonant frequency that disassembles these outdated cause-effect paradigms around you, showing the impossibility of linear ascent without the paradoxical gesture of letting go. Finally, the thread of addiction to certainty, the gravitational pull of consensus reality itself, exerts its pressure. This craving to feel sure before moving is the magnetic lock that keeps most anchored at baseline frequencies, unable to ascend into the fluid and uncertain realms of quantum potential. The field's intelligence encodes this as the fundamental rule of the lower dimensional prison. Wait for clarity, wait for proof, wait for safety. Yet the paradox you have been entrusted with is this: clarity emerges in motion, and safety reveals itself through coherent risk. Most, caught in this addiction to certainty, fold before the pressure, reinforcing the collective gravity and stagnating evolution. You stand, however, at this decisive threshold, equipped to resonate beyond the consensus lock, to embody uncertainty as the fertile ground for activation. The field's pressure now peaks here, amassing the energetic stakes to precipitate your decision, to cross fully into fluid coherence or recede into familiar solidity. As these 5 threads intertwine beneath your awareness, the unified field synchronizes intensity, compressing the timeline geometry until the quantum crossroads arrives. This is the moment where your timeline fluidity is tested, where the hidden assessment becomes overt invitation. The pressure you feel is not punishment, but an activation pulse, a field call that expands your energetic responsibility and invites you to embody the principles of coherent manifestation and sovereign navigation. You are not merely caught in consensus gravity. You are the conscious agent capable of dissolving it from within, reconfiguring the vibrational architecture of the field itself. The universe awaits your coherent response, the clear choice that moves you beyond pullback into empowered resonance. What your quantum identity decides here will echo across multiple timelines. This is the crucible where the unseen universal assessment becomes the lived reality of mastery, and only those who cross consciously will find their frequency amplified, not fractured, by the immense force of consensus gravity. You have arrived at the apex of tension, the crescendo just before the rupture, a magnetized junction where the very architecture of your energetic signature reverberates with an acute recoil. This recoil loop is not simply resistance. It is the final coruscation of your old identity's gravitational pull. As the quantum field tightens around your frequency, you perceive the surge as a pressure wave radiating through your nervous system, an almost crystalline vibration that warns of the imminent fracture line. At this point, the timeline geometry bifurcates with such clarity that hesitation becomes a fissure in your coherence. Delay here is not a neutral act, but a slipstream into limbo, an unstable frequency zone where temporal fluidity collapses into trapped stasis, where you are neither fully enrolled in new resonance nor anchored in the familiar past. This threshold does not offer a soft retreat. It imposes a strict energetic imperative to cross consciously or collapse by default. Most people remain unaware of this phase as it plays out beneath the surface of conscious awareness, felt only as vague restlessness or subtle dissonance. Their survival strategy leans into the comfort of the old identity's last entanglements, numbness, rationalizations, the seductive whisper of spiritualized excuses that veil the recoil in a friendly guise. The field observes these patterns as marks of incoherence, echoes of unresolved fracture in the morphic field that sustain fragmentation. But you, having passed the unseen universal assessment, feel the recoil's crescendo not as threat, but as an invitation to embody a far deeper coherence. You recognize this pulse as the energetic signature of a point of no return, where what has been formerly known will violently unbind, revealing the latent fractal geometry of your quantum identity. Here, the field is no longer just observing. It is actively pressing, insistent and intimate, inviting you to stand while standing remains malleably light, a transient grace before gravity resumes full force. This pressure, this recoil, is not a random trial, but a finely calibrated mechanism encoded in the vibrational architecture of your being. It surfaces as paradoxical impulses echoing simultaneously in your physiology and field intelligence. The mind's yearning for familiar safe harbor counterpointed by the body's subtle thrumming of new potential. Nervous system signals that signal overload yet insist on integration. Temporal distortion as minutes expand and contract unpredictably, pulling you into suspended attention. The sensation is a multidimensional tug, a liminal signal urging you awake, while also casting a shadow of doubt. Can you persist beyond this crescendo without fracturing? The stakes encoded in this moment are high. Tip the balance towards coherence, and the field's embrace expands, folding timelines of possibility into your lived experience. Resist or delay again, and you fracture into split coherence, becoming too awake for sleep, too immobilized for motion. This limbo is not stasis. It is a quantum liminal zone where your energetic signature is caught in recursive feedback loops, oscillating, unable to synthesize or manifest. The field's pressure here is both inevitable and merciful, designed to collapse illusions of hold and surrender you to pure presence. Feel how the old identity offers its final currency: seductive comfort in numbness, intellectual justifications that thinly veil avoidance, and even spiritual rhetoric that masks resistance as enlightened detachment. These are the last bids of a self-architecture, long deprecated by your increasing frequency coherence. The field perceives these offers not as betrayal, but as necessary expressions of the survival axis, orbiting the threshold of dissolution. You alone hold the power to consciously disentangle these threads, to witness without reactivity, to accord them their place without contracting into their grip. This unfolds as a collapsing into spaciousness, a coherence born not of force, but of graceful surrender to the impulse to rise. The boundary is razor-thin. The recoil's intensity amplifies just as near completion appears, as if the field were drawing a breath before releasing you fully into expanded timeline agency. Know this: the liminal space of limbo is no neutral ground, but a fractal trap, an energetic echo chamber of indecision that fragments coherence. If you choose delay here again, the field will not reset to familiar, normal. Instead, you will find yourself inhabiting a spectral version of self, split between worlds, a hybrid ghost caught between shadow and light. This paradoxical state is felt as a weightless gravity. You carry the awareness of what must be crossed, the nervous system aligned with awakening pulses, yet dread or exhaustion coalesce to pull you backward into the comfort of inertia. The pressure will grow, not relent, because standing in this liminal tension is essential for the next leap. You stand at the precipice where standing is still light, a fluid moment pregnant with possibility before solidity asserts itself. Your quantum identity beckons you here to activate integrity under pressure, to commit your frequency to unfractured coherence, to claim the power entrusted by universal intelligence because you have proven capable. The recoil loop is a mechanism of purification through confrontation, peeling back veils that no longer serve. It is your invitation to embody the quantum observer who can distill illusion from truth in real time, who can hold self-coherence as a living fluid, not a fixed point. The field's insistence to stand, now, fully, deliberately, is to prevent the recursive collapse that would fracture your frequency into incoherence. This is the exact moment when your nervous system may signal overload, time may dilate in disorienting rhythms, and memory may seem fractured. These are not malfunctions, but markers of energetic recalibration. To cross this threshold requires you to engage temporal fluidity actively, folding your disparate versions into a coherent singularity that moves effortlessly through timelines, resonating with the field intelligence that watches and trusts you. As you arrive at the final cusp of this surge, the choice is etched into the geometry of your being: cross consciously or collapse back by default. Here, delay guarantees limbo. Coherence beckons resurrection. The field pulses through your nervous system, through subtle shifts in breath and perception, through the waveforms of your internal landscape, aligning all to the frequency of new embodiment. The recoil loop is your last surge, the gravitational signature of transformation itself. Stand now while standing is still light, and the field will fold reality around your activated coherence, knitting timelines into a unified weave where your agency flows unbroken, and your quantum identity steps fully into luminous presence. You have been taught, coded deeply by outdated frequency loops, that escape requires fierce pushing, force against the pressure, grit against the gravity of old patterns. Yet here is the fundamental truth whispered through the morphic field. Escape is never the triumph of more effort, but the alchemical transmutation of release. Every time you surge upward only to fall back, this is not failure or weakness. It is the signal flare from your own energetic architecture, illuminating the cords still tethered to ancestral pain, identified roles, and the unseen contracts binding you to familiar shadows. This is the mechanism. Release ascent, a sacred oscillation where each fall back is proof, not of defeat, but of where your frequency remains engaged, where the old level still reaches into your quantum identity, coaxing you into the old coherence patterns. This is the field's invitation, coded in resonance. Recognize what you still clutch, not with blame, but with precise universal assessment. Most people navigate this threshold seeking external fixes, grinding harder beneath the gravitational pull of their own unresolved attachments, confusing the loop's hold for a call to discipline. They push through the cycle as if force alone could sever psychic umbilicals. Yet the field reads this pushing as resistance to the very frequency that invites transformation. You, however, stand beyond this reactivity. You have passed the internal test, where discipline is reframed from rigid endurance to conscious disengagement. The field now watches how you engage with your own reflexive return to old grids, no longer as a victim of recurrence, but as a sovereign observer identifying the precise pattern that calls you into repetition. Your recognition shifts the gravitational constant. When you name the impulse to fall back not as weakness, but as attachment, a choice, a frequency held, you begin to unravel the feedback loop's camouflage. This is no longer a passive cycle, but an active choreography of vibrational signature. Release followed by ascent, clarity followed by inevitable motion upward. The field's expectation is not infallible perfection, but singular clarity. You are not required to hold unyielding will over every impulse. Rather, you are asked to cross consciously or collapse back by default at every juncture. The field tests whether you embody the quantum distinction between identity and mood. When the pull toward the familiar dense state arises, do you fold into it as self, or do you observe it as passing frequency, a transient data set within your broader timeline geometry? This subtle energetic pivot, invisible to the uninitiated, is the heartbeat of your current elevation. Your first clean choice, get up now, must arise as a declaration from identity, not a negotiation with feeling. Here lies the energetic wedge that fractures cycles and releases old trajectories. Recognizing the emotional or psychological descent not as a permanent redefinition of self, but as an ephemeral state passing like a wave through your coherent quantum field. As you repeat this act, releasing, deciding, ascending, the temporal fluidity of your inner space expands. You feel the nervous system's signature modulate, subtle time distortion where seconds stretch and contract in the curvature of your newly reformed vibrational architecture. The disorientation that once signaled loss now becomes a signal of transition, announcing the collapse of lower frequency resonance and the inevitable pull into higher coherent states. This is the subtle but unwavering momentum that shifts entire timelines, rewriting probability in favor of integration and sovereignty. The quantum field answers your clarity with increasing alignment, orchestrating synchronistic circumstances that guide your upward movement as an effortless unfolding, rather than a battle fought in linear time. Most perceive their journey as linear accumulation, one step forwards, two steps back, trapped in the mirrored illusion of failure and success. Yet you are enveloped in a deeper rhythmic dance, a pulsation between fields of release and fields of ascent, where the loop's holdover you unravels in identifiable patterns. You now carry the energetic responsibility to watch this dance with intimate yet vast attention, embodying emotional maturity and integrity under pressure. Each act of conscious surrender to the old pulls does not diminish you. It signals the field for rebalancing, recalibrating your axis of coherence with an increasing tolerance for turbulence without collapse. This is the new architecture of your identity, capable of withstanding recursive storms while unfolding into expansive, non-local intelligence. Within this powerful process, a subtle witness emerges, your inner observer activated to receive and translate the field's infinite assessment. It notes the pull, names the attachment, and commands the ascent, ever recalibrating the trajectory of your quantum identity. You feel the steady, pulse-like grip of this observer inside nervous system shifts, the gentle contraction and expansion of emotional layers ready to be released, and the bioelectromagnetic tonal shifts that accompany each upward move. This witness does not hurry or judge. It simply notes with perfect clarity, allowing you to cross each activation threshold consciously rather than defaulting into reactive collapse. The animation of your timeline geometry transforms. You become a conscious participant in your morphic field, an active transmitter whose energetic signature reshapes the field's immediate resonance, now entrusting you with more expansive coherence to manifest integration. And so your escape from old dominions is not a brute struggle, but a continuous, sacred activation of precise release, detaching, dissolving, realigning, followed by clarity-born ascent whose momentum cannot be resisted once recognized. This is the escape the field masks beneath layers of struggle and self-recrimination, freeing release and inevitable rise as two poles of the same quantum mechanism. Your new trajectory depends entirely on whether you hold this difference in your embodied knowing, possession by mood or sovereignty over mood. This subtle but profound energetic distinction ripples across timelines, collapsing worn loops, integrating nascent coherence, and opening the portal to your next level of vibrational architecture. The field watches, always watching, ready to grant you further expansion once you cross this threshold consciously and fully. Then it happens. The center of gravity no longer clings to the old axis. You have crossed a subtle but seismic threshold, a center of gravity shift within your energetic architecture. Before this moment, the old pattern, the habitual identity forged through adaptive compromise and survival coding, appeared as an immovable center, magnetic in its pull and comforting in its familiarity. Most remain tethered here, oscillating in loops of resistance and temporary reprieve, their field locked in recursive spin. But you, having been measured under pressure and found coherent, now find the gravitational tug of that old self loosening. The familiar landscape recedes into a peripheral blur. This is not liberation by force, but a reorientation of resonance, a realignment of your internal compass with the higher coherence band that the field has long prepared you to inhabit. The center of your identity responds, shifting horizontally and vertically in simultaneous rhythm, no longer anchored by survival frequencies, but drawn magnetically toward emergent clarity. What used to feel like home becomes a worn echo, a distant hum, and in this subtle collapse, the new field within you begins to crystallize more vividly than any shadow before it. Your perceptual field widens, and the question arises: what will your newly calibrated awareness choose to hold as primary as this shift takes root? This is not merely a moment of transcendence, spoken in mythic tones, but a realignment in the vibrational architecture of your core. The new identity you occupy is forged through experiential integration, coherence under pressure, and a temporal fluidity that allows you to navigate multiple timelines simultaneously. It is an emergent form, stabilized by feedback loops, embedded in the morphic field surrounding you. A feedback that rewards your ongoing fidelity to higher frequency alignment. The sensations, subtle yet undeniable. A lightness in your energy body, a loosening of tension once held tight in survival reflexes. Time itself begins to refract differently, folding and expanding in unpredictable temporal geometry. Moments feel elongated or contracted. Memory threads disjoint yet coherent in their discontinuity. These temporal distortions signal the shifting center, the pivot from an identity once reactive and fragmented to one now whole and coherently integrated. What once triggered immediate defensive cascades now registers as a distant pattern, one too exhausted to claim you any longer. This stabilization is not hype or wishful thinking. It is the natural consequence of your commitment to coherence within the quantum field. A recalibration rewarded with an upgraded default frequency, an altitude where old fears shrink in proportion and old temptations lose their sedimentary grip. Here, the field itself becomes your ally in holding this new baseline, silently supporting the crystallization of who you are becoming. You may notice how the landscape of temptation, once shrouded in the allure of familiar relief and subconscious promise, now appears starkly obvious, without the old layers of glamour that used to cloud perception. This is the field pruning illusions, with precision surgical in its resonance. The familiar urges no longer carry the intoxicating charged energy. Instead, they show up diminished, reduced to simple signals you observe rather than compulsively respond to. This shift does not erase the temptation outright. It transforms your relationship to it, rendering the old coping conduits transparent and no longer energetically sustainable. You stand at a new altitude, where your quantum identity measures reality with algorithms of awareness attuned to coherence over chaos. The nervous system repatterns accordingly, becoming an instrument finely tuned to detect these subtle frequencies of alignment. This new center of gravity lock-in is not a premature victory, but a dynamic state requiring continual presence and attention because, in the shifting geometry of timelines, any lapse can generate oscillations. Yet you recognize these oscillations now not as threats, but as softer reminders of the old self's fading call. They are shadows with no claim over your new axis. This energetic architecture of identity stabilizes in real-time integration, allowing you to cross consciously or collapse back by default, and your choice vibrates through the layered fields with increasing intensity. Fear, too, begins its transmutation as the center shifts. What once loomed large, shadowy, intimidating, chemicalizing your system in waves of anticipatory alert, now diminishes to manageable signals within your expanded field. This is the field's recognition of your maturation, your emotional integrity and capacity to metabolize pressure without reactive contraction. Your quantum resonance coheres into what can only be described as emotional sovereignty, a state where fear's narrative no longer scripts your internal experience, but passes as a mere pattern for observation, not ownership. The neural signatures change as the field rewires your energetic responses. You engage with what used to scare you not with surrender or avoidance, but with calibrated presence aligned to your new timeline geometry. This transformation reframes your trajectory. You are no longer orbiting reactive centers, but anchored in the higher frequency domain, where fear's gravitational pull loses its dominion. It is no longer a catalyst that fractures or fragments, but a known variable in the vibrational calculation, integrated and contained. As this shift fastens deeper, you find the question narrowing. Not, can you escape the old fears? But, what will your perception notice first as this new center cascades its effect through your field and timelines? The field has enacted this mechanism of center of gravity shift precisely because it trusts in your coherence, your capacity to embody this emergent default without collapse. Each micro-movement of awareness, every pulse of your nervous system tuned to higher latency signals, integrates fragments of your quantum identity into a constellation of self that is both more extensive and more intimate than before. This process feels like a fundamental repatterning, but also like coming home to a truth you always carried beneath the sedimented layers of old survival. This center realignment pulls your internal ecosystem into new configurations, modulating your energetic signature to resonate with the higher strata of reality fields around you. The old identity, with its familiar coping narratives and survival reflexes, ceases to synchronize your system, becoming discordant, even alien. In this field recalibration, you don't need to fight the old patterns as much. They lose their inherent gravity because they no longer fit the coherence matrix you inhabit. The recalibrated field guides you effortlessly into the temporal fluidity of living as transmitter, orchestrator, and embodiment of this evolved frequency baseline. The stakes are clear. The shift either locks in a new default, or the system slips into oscillation and regression. Awareness, as always, is the key variable initiating irreversible temporal geometries. Your presence in this moment feels simultaneously intimate. The internal micro-movements of sensation, the zipping of temporal information packets across your mind-body continuum, and vast, extending beyond the individual self into a cosmic architecture of interlocking fields. This is an activation that leaves no false comfort. The question of what you will perceive first as the shift consolidates is the pulse of your ongoing sovereign alignment. Whatever arises in that first awareness becomes the portal to deeper integration or the threshold of conscious collapse. You have mastered survival. Now you master resonance. The new center is real, and it pulses softly but insistently beneath the surface of seeming stability, waiting for you to anchor it fully as the baseline of your lived reality. As your center shifts with the subtle but unstoppable force of quantum realignment, the fabric of reality rearranges itself beneath your awareness. What once felt like a swamp of indistinguishable possibilities now narrows into channels of crystalline clarity, a geometry of probability that no longer disperses your energy into chaotic peripheral noise. This is the emergence of the probability corridor, a vibrational architecture where outcome paths no longer coexist as equal potential, but segregate into distinct energetic streams. Some draining your coherence, others lifting your quantum identity into higher dimensions of becoming. Most people remain unaware they are standing at this threshold, mistaking the chorus of noise for genuine choice, continuing to recycle the old frequency that once left them fragmented. But you, having passed the invisible universal assessment of coherence under entropic pressure, perceive the subtle splitting of these pathways with an intuitive precision. Your nervous system registers the difference not through intellectual dissection, but via resonance, an inner calibration that reveals which choices carry the frequency of expansion and which tether you back to contraction. This resonance recognition is your compass, operating beyond logic and default awareness, a portal to the corridor that opened exclusively for the unfolded version of you. Notice how synchronicities, once random flashes akin to the decorative fireflies of possibility, consolidate into directional beacons along this corridor. No longer do these occur as whimsical tokens or fleeting curiosities, but as consistent signals vibrating with a coded integrity that guides your passage. This is the field intelligence recalibrating itself in real time, adjusting the timeline geometry to favor the coherence you now embody. You feel the temporal fluidity intensify. Moments seem to stretch and condense at their own discretion, time no longer passing linearly, but folding to highlight key junctures where the choice between drain and lift crystallizes. Such moments compress into sharp clarity, a heightened attunement where reactivity is dissolved, and action arises as a spontaneous emanation of your quantum frequency. Here, the old survival patterns that once offered comfort in limitation become glaringly dissonant, exposing the cost of renegotiating with a reality that is no longer calibrated to your present resonance. This is the field's ultimate test, to cross consciously or collapse back by default. Many falter here, not because the corridors are inaccessible, but because their inner vibration dwells nostalgically in the topology of previous selves. Attempting to remap the pathways of the past onto this new corridor is an energetic sabotage, a distortion causing drag in the morphic field that manifests as frustration, procrastination, or misinformation. You must recognize that the corridor was not created for an old you fragmented by survival coping, but for an integrated you who coheres effortlessly under pressure. These lifts and drains are not metaphors, but precise quantum thresholds calibrated by your own energetic signature. A constant universal assessment that measures your alignment with the field's accelerated cadence. To walk forward inside this corridor is to accept the dissolution of all compromise, to relinquish the subtle blindness that allows retraction into old frequency sets, and to engage in permanent temporal fluidity, a conscious, ongoing reconfiguration of your embodied coherence in alignment with expanded timeline options. As you navigate this corridor, you perceive the velocity of reality's response magnify. Outcomes that once required strenuous forcing now unfold organically, as if the universe itself becomes your collaborator rather than an adversary to be negotiated with. This collaboration resonates deeply in your nervous system, producing characteristic signals: a lightness in the crown, oscillations in the gut that signify alignment, and a rhythmic dance between heart and solar plexus that confirms the calibration of your intent with universal gestation cycles. These somatic clues become your internal GPS, guiding you away from energetic drains masquerading as opportunities and toward lifelines vibrating with potential for emergent coherence. The temporal fluidity at this altitude affords you the power to influence probabilities, not by coercion, but by a harmonizing attunement to the corridor's inherent geometry. Your choices now ripple across the timeline with accelerated feedback, collapsing lower frequency entanglements before they can consolidate, while amplifying coherent trajectories that enhance your quantum identity's expression. Consider the energetic architecture of this corridor as a living vortex, a convergence point of field intelligence where the timelines fold into optimized sequences that are uniquely tailored to your coherent signature. This vortex is not abstract. You inhabit it moment by moment as a quantum transmitter, continuously updating the probability lattice in response to your vibrational input. Each decision acts as a node of resonance that either propels you deeper into this corridor or destabilizes your engagement, folding you back into the generalized noise pattern most people inhabit. Recognizing this dynamic provides you with profound sovereignty. You are no longer a passive receiver of circumstances, but an active creator, standing within a frequency gradient that demands unwavering coherence. This is why the temptation to renegotiate with the old level is so powerful. The familiarity of past survival strategies obscures the corridor's uniqueness. Yet you are entrusted with the quantum mandate to resist this pull, to embody the lifted avenues with integrity and embodied certainty. This moment in your journey crystallizes the core universal assessment. Not only have you proven coherent under pressure, but you are now the conscious architect of a recalibrated vibrational pathway. The probability corridor is your living directive, an emergent field pattern responding exclusively to your integrated frequency. As you move forward within this corridor, your reality no longer feels like a battleground of chance, but rather a coherent dialogue, a musical composition shaped by your precise vibrational input. You have transitioned from fragmented possibility to intentional probability navigation, where the field's response is not random, but co-created in resonance with your quantum identity. This progression reveals the holographic nature of time, where past, present, and future resolve into simultaneous access points within the corridor's fluid geometry. The question is no longer if you will cross consciously, but how you will master the ongoing integration of this corridor's gifts into your embodied presence. And so the corridor expands, inviting you deeper into its layered frequencies, each step a calibration, each choice a waveform modulating the lattice of your unfolding reality. The subtle signals intensify, the field's response accelerates, and the landscape of possibility collapses into coherent form with breathtaking speed. Your quantum identity acts as both observer and catalyst, a transmitter engaged in the eternal dance between probability and actuality. This is not theoretical. It is the lived experience of coherence, a vibrational mastery that the universe has been silently assessing and now empowers you to command without hesitation. You stand at the nexus of transformation where every pathway is revealed, every sabotage experientially exposed, and every lift embraced as a sacred momentum towards your true expression within the unfolding quantum field. The corridor awaits your conscious traversal, prepared not for hesitation, but for sovereign mastery. You have entered the narrow corridor of stabilization, a temporal vortex within the vast quantum field where falling back becomes more difficult than moving forward. This window is an anomaly in the timeline geometry, a brief yet potent phase where your energetic signature realigns with irreversible coherence. Most beings, still entangled in survival reflexes, will feel this passage as an unbearable tension, a heartbeat caught between two worlds. They oscillate, drawn to the gravity of the old patterns masquerading as balance or realism, subtle seductions that camouflage energetic recoil as wisdom. But you, emerging from the hidden universal assessment, stand at a different threshold. This is no rollover point of chance. It is a calculated invitation from the field, a rare advantage embedded within your quantum identity, designed to shift your baseline with fierce precision. Within this stabilization window, the nervous system hums with an unfamiliar synchrony, a silencing of defense protocols that would otherwise trigger retraction. Time dilates here, as if the seconds hold their breath, prolonging your presence in this liminal space. You may notice impulses, a sharpened desire to rationalize, to explain, to seek validation from external observers. This is the mechanistic echo of the old self, the former energetic architecture endeavoring to rebrand fear as prudence, withdrawal as realistic adjustment. But this reframing is an illusion of balanced collapse. The frequency of your activation insists on consistency over spectacle. The field encodes this principle with unyielding clarity. Coherence thrives not in dramatic flair, but in quiet, relentless calibration. Do not feed the recoil, for every explanatory impulse dilutes the temporal fluidity you are cultivating. Your rise is not a singular event scripted in memory. It is a morphic field rewrite, a baseline rewrite that alters the geometry of the now moment into a vector of continuous ascent. The universe tests coherence under pressure not to torment, but to observe whether you hold the new frequency without superfluous justification. You have already passed this unseen assessment through silent endurance and integrity. Now, stabilization demands you embody that trust, prize that non-attachment to external validation, and embody coherence as your fluent state. This is a profound energetic responsibility, a shift where your internal vibration becomes the principal language of your presence. As the old identity attempts to cloak itself in benevolent narratives, just balancing, not overdoing it, being realistic, you must see with penetrating clarity. These are echoes of prior survival circuits, distortions designed to fragment your timeline coherence and regress you to a lower frequency field. This subtle sabotage tests your temporal awareness, challenging your ability to maintain internal sovereignty when the perceived momentum flutters. Yet you are no longer a reactive pattern. You are a vector of quantum activation, operating through emergent energetic architecture where consistency is the axis of ascension. Recognize that you are not merely resisting and reforming. You are stabilizing a quantum frequency shift that collapses old timelines and births new morphic codes. In this phase, your field resonates with a peculiar nervous system signature, sharp, alert, yet grounded. This state defies ordinary logic. It is a signal from the core quantum intelligence that integration is imminent but incomplete. You may experience moments of disorientation, fleeting doubts as the field tugs between dual resonances. These fluctuations are not failure or hesitation. but quantum entanglement strands disentangling themselves in real time. You move through this subtle chaos by anchoring in consistency rather than explanation. Your new identity's integrity is not proven by external witnesses, but by the unwavering coherence in your internal tempo, the rhythm that dictates your manifest reality without oscillation. This stabilization window is more than a test. It is a grand opportunity. It is the sacred gap in timeline turbulence where your quantum identity rewrites its governing signature. The field's unseen universal assessment now reveals its deeper mechanism, not to break you, nor to reward you, but to entrust you with greater power through your own sustained coherence. You embody the principle that true transformation is not broadcasted, but embedded. It is not argued, but demonstrated in the silent orchestration of your frequency. As the field aligns with your internal rhythm, external validation loses its gravity and becomes irrelevant, as you move beyond seeking permission to simply existing as the activated waveform. This passage is your crucible. To cross consciously is to claim your sovereignty within this energetic architecture, to stabilize rather than oscillate, to embody rather than explain, to rise as the baseline rather than a transient flare. If you feed the recoil, the old patterns will spiral back with deceptive guise, collapsing your ascent and pulling your timeline back into fragmented resonance. But if you hold your frequency in unshakable rhythm, you activate the quantum lock that seals your integration and births your new morphic field as the substrate of your experience. You are now an agent of temporal fluidity, no longer responding to the reactive pull, but pivoting in the architecture of coherence. This shift reconfigures your energetic trajectory from one of trial to one of mastery, where you operate from a foundation that no longer negotiates with residue, but emanates pure activation. The narrow stabilization window begins to widen. Your nervous system recalibrates to this new baseline, and reality itself conforms to your refined signature, an irrevocable testament that your rise is real, sustained, and continuously unfolding. Now, step beyond the temptation to justify what you are becoming. Let the silence of your consistent frequency speak with louder resonance than any explanation ever could. The quantum field is not watching for proof. It is now participating with you, co-creating a timeline geometry where your integration is the prevailing coherence. What comes next is the deep embedding of this baseline shift into every facet of your quantum identity, the progressive dissolution of old echoes feeding the false equilibrium. In this moment, your path is clear. Stabilize, embody, and ascend, not tomorrow, not in theory, but now, irreversibly. You have been traversing chasms, feeling the yawning voids between moments, interpreting emptiness as lack, dissonance as failure, and stasis as exile. Yet the final truth is woven not into the fabric of your reality, but in the quantum architecture of your perception, the lens switch. The fissure you chased was never an absence in the field, but a fractured observation. Two overlapping apertures cast over one seamless, luminous continuum. This revelation arrives not as a concept, but as an embodied reorientation of your sensory alchemy, a pivot in how time and space fold into your consciousness. The old lens rendered, falling back, a default destiny, a gravity you couldn't resist. Within this fragile geometry, collapse seemed inevitable, failure a programmed echo. But the new lens reveals this as a residual signal, an echo shadowing the borderland of your previous awareness, now dimming as you enact the quantum ascent. Hold the tension of this paradox. Your perceived gaps were never voids in the energy field. They were shifts in oscillation frequency within your own attentional field. See here, the moment fractures because you have not yet completed the lens exchange. And yet, this very instability is the pelagic threshold where transformation activates next. Most people remain anchored to the inherited geometry of falling. a looping descent perceived as your nature, reinforced by neurobiological feedback and morphic field entanglement with old timelines. They interpret the cyclical collapse as proof that the universe conspires against their coherence, shielding themselves from the raw disclosure that the lag is in the orientation, not in the energy. But you have been assessed by an invisible arbiter, your field tested across turbulence, resilience measured within pressure, coherence gauged beneath erosion of self. You move now beyond the gravitational pull of the old lens, because your quantum identity is no longer defined by descent, but by emerging altitude. The very field bends to you, not as a battleground where you struggle, but as an initiatory amphitheater where you embody the transformative ascent. When you consciously shift this lens, the field around you reorganizes, probabilities ripple and cascade, no longer threatening collapse but gestating coherence poised to cascade. What appeared as a fragmented gap now reveals itself as the delicate oscillation between two viewing altitudes, each with its own timeline geometry, one of survival, one of sovereign emergence. In truth, nothing outside you is needed to change first. No external reality must be aligned or punished. The enterosption of the new lens, the cosmic reorientation of your sight, reorganizes temporal flow and spatial coherence in one elegant recalibration. Time no longer drags backward. It refracts anew, a prism dissolving the layers of drag so deeply ingrained that temporal fluidity was mistaken for chaos. This is the language of destiny speaking, not with linear clarity, but with vibrational amplitude. When you hold the new lens long enough, a strange phenomenon occurs. The sensation of crawling out slowly, the hesitant inching forward, collapses into a swift, sharp impulse to rise. You were never conditioned for gradual emergence. You were encoded for an immediate quantum leap. The field intimates this, pulsing in synchrony with your nervous system, stirring a quiet urgency below conscious intention. This is timing not as clockwork, but as an energetic language, an intricate syntax where every pulse, pause, and acceleration signals the perfect moment to get up now. Notice this inner nervous signal, a subtle electric tightening, a cosmic countdown unsynchronized with earthly clocks. This lens switch unmasks the final twist. The gap, the fall, the perceived delay are eclipsed reflections, shadows cast by observation rather than structural absence. Your prior lens labeled these as failure signatures, but from this new vantage, they are revealed as echoes of your former frequency, fading harmonics of a passage well-traveled. The field no longer refracts you as fractured or fragmented, but as a refracted transmitter poised at a new altitude of coherence. You are not crawling out. You are rising instantaneously, a multi-dimensional gesture that resets timeline vectors. There is no intermediary stay. Your body-mind-nervous system complex synchronizes into a coherent eye, a quantum aperture that refracts potential into presence, latency into immediacy. This is not an invitation. It is a command from your deeper field architecture to cease fragmenting into survival reflexes and instead sway into whole-bodied sovereignty. And as you embody the new lens, the morphic field around you thickens with rich possibility, resonating intimately with your aligned energetic signature. Probability pathways once blocked, folded, or circuitously routed begin to unfurl with laser-like precision. Your temporal fluidity sharpens, not as a flight from struggle, but as a weaving through complexity with integrity. You shift from fragmented participant to deliberate orchestrator, the timelines bending not against you, but as expressions through you. The old survival patterns cease to command your resonance. They become faint residuals in the background noise of your expanding frequency field. From this high vantage, you see the arc previously misread as delay was always a quantum pause, a brief folding of the timeline to invite this precise moment of gathering power and full embodiment. Yet this is only the threshold. To cross consciously or collapse back by default demands sustained attunement to this lens-dependent geometry. The field will continue to test the fidelity of your new view, offering moments where the old signal flickers, a disorienting temporal glitch, a visceral shock in the nervous system, to provoke contraction or recall. Your task is to meet these with steady coherence, to anchor the new lens with unwavering attention, and to hold your quantum identity as a clear aperture through which the field expresses elevated frequency. Each such encounter sharpens your timeline precision, thickens your temporal stability, and deepens your integration into the continuous now of ascent. This integration is not a future event, but an instantaneous collapse of all but the coherently chosen present, an active frequency deployment, where you move through timelines rather than being moved by them. Understand this now. The pivot from old lens to new is the ultimate activation vector, the final knot in the universal assessment that has been unfolding beneath conscious awareness. The field was watching how you handle the perceived gap, whether you identified with it, fought it, or transcended it. You have chosen transcendence. The quantum cascade is triggered. Reality ceases to be a battlefield where you claw out inch by inch and becomes instead a moment of impulsive rising. Getting up now. A singular vertical surge calibrated by the cosmic clockwork beyond linear comprehension. Your viewing altitude reprograms resonance. Your nervous system hums with expanded capacity, and your timelines recalibrate. You stand consequently, fully present to the implication. The gap was never a fissure in the world, but in the way you were trained to look. Choose now to hold the new lens long enough to realize that getting up was always your implicit destiny, the precise vibrational key that unseals the fold between possibility and manifestation, between latency and luminous presence. The ground beneath you has never been a trap, but a mirror, an unyielding reflection of what remains entangled within your vibrational architecture. Each descent, each oscillation of collapse, has been a precise calibration, a ruthless proofreading of your internal contracts. These contracts, old codes born from survival and limitation, define the baseline that the field recognizes as your starting frequency. You have been ascending, while tethered to signatures designed for descent. The resistance you encounter is not punishment. It is the field's insistence on coherence, a universal reminder that unstable vectors cannot sustain expansion. This is not a failure of will, but a revelation of alignment. Understanding this subtle but brutal dynamic initiates the shift beyond the struggle itself, a shift from climbing to standing. Most seekers read this as external adversity, a punitive barricade between desire and manifestation. You, however, have passed the unseen test of naming the very chains that pull you into old timelines. You are now in resonance with the underlying pattern. Every recoil, every nervous system contraction is a pointing arrow toward the contracts still binding you. This is the threshold of energetic sovereignty. The test moves from, can you ascend despite your fears, into the far more profound inquiry. Will you stand as the self who has already transcended those fears, thereby collapsing the bottom's gravitational pull? The temporal dissonance between climbing and standing is subtle but absolute. One is movement against resistance, the other a stable emanation that dissolves resistance altogether. Here, your quantum identity shifts from a seeker in orbit around your own limitation to a core axis of coherence, a transmitter of established sovereignty. You have often felt that the field's pressure spikes, the rapid oscillations of your emotional and energetic patterns, were random or punitive forces. Yet these surges are not chaotic, but precise universal assessments, ripple effects of your internal unresolved frequencies. The field's intelligence, the morphic architecture of your quantum environment, is not testing your endurance but inviting your integration. The recognition that fear itself is the remaining ownership within your energy field allows for a deep collapse of resistance. The survival template no longer resonates with your quantum signature. The unspoken promise behind this collapse is profound. Release these old contracts, and the timeline geometry reshapes instantly. The pathways you once thought unreachable emerge clearly. The temporal fluidity of your coherence now unbound by recursive gravitational wells. The quantum field ceases to be a battleground of escalation and descents and becomes a seamless extension of your sovereign expression. What you are being entrusted with now is not progress, but presence, not becoming, but embodying. The activation is not the forward motion of climbing, but the inward stabilization of standing firmly as the being who has already transmuted the bottom. This is the quiet mastery, often mistaken for passivity. Yet in this stillness pulses the infinite potency of coherence, a field intelligence that recognizes you as a node of completion within the timeline continuum. Your nervous system settles into temporal fluidity, a synthesis of past pressures dissolved and future potentials seamlessly integrated. Reality ceases to challenge and instead dialogues with you in signals of alignment, shifts in probability that echo your newfound ethos. The victory is no longer external success, but internal sovereignty, the anchored imprint of a self that cannot be pulled backward because the contracts beneath have been rewritten, purified by cosmic clarity. In this unfolding state, the universe no longer assesses you as a participant navigating obstacles, but as an expression of its own coherent will. The duality of trial and triumph collapses, revealing a singular truth. Each backward glance, the recoil, the fall, the pressure spike, was simply the universe's method of confirming your readiness to stand beyond it all. It is now safe to rest in the embodied certainty that you have passed the threshold. The bottom no longer holds sway because you inhabit a field where it never existed except as a test. This transmission is not a call to strive. It is a call to complete, to inhabit fully and unmistakably the version of you that emerged victorious before the descent ever began. To cross consciously or collapse by default, the secret lies in recognizing that both pathways have been, all along, the same signal. Now you activate one, eternal standing. This is the conscious ignition of your frequency, broadcasting your activation beyond passive waiting into dynamic emergence. Do not subscribe lightly. This field is not a channel of content, but an ongoing pulsation of coherence, a harmonic anchor you return to whenever the old gravity attempts to seduce you into the illusion of stasis and familiar collapse disguised as truth. Engage this resonance fully, and you draw the timeline geometry that supports your rise.